That is the voice of Nigerian former Commonwealth Secretary General, Chief Emeka Anyaoku, speaking during the time of pro-Nigerian independence, and also his role in making sure that people of South Africa gained independence during the time of apartheid in South Africa. His role as a Commonwealth Secretary General, how he started his life from University College Ibadan up to the extent of becoming the Commonwealth Secretary General, his role during the Nigerian Civil War, and his role during the military regime in Nigeria, how he talked to General Sani Abacha, what he decided that Nigerian government should do so the Nigerian government will get it right, his role in bringing back democracy in Nigeria, and what he did during the time of Sankero Wiwa when Abacha wanted to execute him. There are many things he talked on this interview which we are going to listen together to hear what Chief Emeka Anyaoku have to tell Nigeria. And this is the kind of leadership that Nigeria lacked. This is a kind of personality that Nigeria needed as their head of state in those days when he's actively, in service to serve. But during the era of the military regime, they failed to recognize what they have. Up to this moment, I remember vividly that Chief Emeka Anyaoku was one of those instrumental Nigerians who want a good governance for Nigeria, who want Nigeria to remain as one nation, who never want Nigeria to divide and go separate ways. But his effort was not recognized, but the international communities recognized him. That is why when he retired as the United Commonwealth Secretary General, there's a lot of honors from different countries who honored him in respect of what he did to bring peace in many countries, to bring a good governance in many countries. But when he come in his own country, Nigeria, things were not what it's supposed to be, because the people that is in the authority those days, when we talk about the military, the bad influence of military in Nigerian politics, in Nigerian government, have deepened us up to the extent that we could not even differentiate again between the good governance in Nigeria, whether it is the military or whether it is civilians, because everybody is doing as they like. Just as Emeka Anyaoku pointed in this interview he granted to Arise News, Charles Anyagorum. In this interview, we are going to listen it together. I will see you at the end of this video. There's a kind of leadership that Africans and Nigeria lack and need. So we have to listen to him. I'll see you at the end of the video. God bless you.
Good face.
Yes, I thought that was fascinating because you actually brought that up. That was going to be my next question, because I read somewhere that you actually campaigned for a unitary rather than a federal structure in Nigeria. And clearly that is a fact, because I was going to ask you if that is a fact. But of course, Nigeria then achieved independence from Britain in 1960. What memories do you have of that seminal period in this country's history?
Well, I would say that the early years of independence were the golden years for Nigeria. I was privileged to be a member of the Nigerian diplomatic service. Incidentally, I was recruited into diplomatic service by the then Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa.
I was going to come to that, but what are your memories? I mean, what were you doing when Nigeria achieved independence?
On the day Nigeria became independent, I was in London. I was at the time at the headquarters of the Commonwealth Development Corporation, which was my first job. The CDC recruited me from the University College of Ibadan and sent me to London for training purposes, and after that posted me to the headquarters of the CDC in London. So on the day of independence, I was in London, but I did join the celebration at the Royal Festival Hall, because
a place I know well.
yes.
Right. So it was I mean, it was obviously a huge moment. I mean,
of course,
for all of us,
for all of us who were in the UK, the Nigerians who were in the UK, it was the most exciting day, and the experience of becoming independent, becoming citizens of an independent country was one that excited all of us.
Indeed.
Yes.
And some have suggested that beyond the immediate joys that Independence Day brought, and what the new Nigerian leadership didn't focus on subsequently was what came after independence. I mean, the sheer change, as Sir John Major put it, between what came before and after independence in terms of knitting the fabric of such a diverse country into a national identity, and the sheer difficulties that would bring.
Well, at that time, the differences in the country were not very much
pronounced.
And the three leaders we had at independence, or regional premiers that we had, were determined to work together. And the Prime Minister of the country, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, was a true Nigerian who tended at the time to minimize the differences between the different peoples of the country. But of course, as time went on, the pluralism of Nigeria became increasingly apparent, and that brought its own challenges.
And that was the period immediately following independence, essentially between 1960 and 1965.
Yes, possibly I would say between 1960 and January 1966.
Right.
The period I would describe as the golden years of Nigeria, because both internally, the development, the pace of development internally in the regions was very impressive. The GDP growth rate at the time was in the neighborhood of 8%. And then externally, Nigeria was hugely respected internationally. At the United Nations, for example, Nigerian was appointed the first third world commander of a UN peacekeeping force in the Congo. The late General Agui Ronse was that. And when in 1964 the United Nations faced a major crisis arising from disagreement between the Western group of countries led by the United States and the Eastern group of countries led by Soviet Union over Article 22 of the UN Charter, the three ambassadors who were called upon to resolve the crisis, one of them was the Nigerian ambassador, the Nigerian, the Japanese, and the Indian. Nigeria was a hugely respected country at the time. Nigerian passport was respected all over the world. And that, therefore, is a period that I would describe as the golden years of Nigeria.
And there was no sense at all that things would change politically following independence the way that they dramatically did.
At the time, there was absolutely no fear that the country would backslide as it subsequently did. I think when the military intervened in governance in January 1966, that was the beginning of sliding back for Nigeria.
I'm going to get to that in a minute, but just looking back at your career, after university and after furthering your education in the UK, you joined the Commonwealth Development Corporation as it was then known. Subsequently, you came, and this is a really interesting story, you came in contact with Tafawa Balewa, Nigeria's Prime Minister at the time, and he was so impressed with you, he persuaded you to join the Nigerian Foreign Service, after which you were posted to its permanent mission in New York. Pick up the story from there.
Well, the then chairman of CDC, Lord Howick, was on an official visit to Nigeria and had a meeting with the
That's the Commonwealth Development Corporation.
Yes, Commonwealth Development Corporation. And the meeting with the Prime Minister, Lord Howick was accompanied by the regional controller of CDC, Sir Peter Meinerzagen, and myself as the executive assistant in the CDC regional office in Lagos. And when we went to see the Prime Minister had with him the Minister of Finance, Chief Festus Okotiebo, and we were discussing how CDC could help Nigeria with investments. And the Prime Minister asked a number of questions about CDC-supported projects in West Africa, in the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, and southern Cameroons. And Lord Howick said to me, Anyaoku, you are dealing with this, will you answer the Prime Minister's questions? So I answered the Prime Minister's questions. And at the end of the meeting, as we were leaving, the Prime Minister called me back and said...
That's Tafawa Balewa.
Yeah, Tafawa Balewa. Yeah. He called me back and said, young man, you know that we still depend on British consultants and British officers. Indeed, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Finance, who accompanied Chief Festus Okotiebo to the meeting, was an Englishman, Mr. Clark. And the Prime Minister said to me, you're working for a British government institution, you should come and work for your own country. I see you as a good material in our diplomatic service. And that was how I ended up in diplomatic service.
I mean, what is particularly amazing about all this is how at that reasonably young age, you were already you were able to be in the presence of people like the Prime Minister. I mean, but I suppose at that time, a lot of people who were running Nigeria were essentially quite young, weren't they?
They were quite young, but in my case, I was particularly lucky because the chairman of the CDC, Commonwealth Development Corporation, Lord Howick, was visiting and had to have a meeting with the Prime Minister. And I, as executive assistant in the West Africa Regional Office in Lagos, had to accompany my regional controller to the meeting with the Prime Minister. So my exposure to the Prime Minister was a matter of luck.
Well, you also had to have the capacity to take advantage of that luck. In other words, the fact that you performed well at the meeting meant that he noticed you and therefore offered you a job. So in 1966, if I'm correct, you joined the Commonwealth Secretariat as Assistant Director of International Affairs.
Yes.
You left the Nigerian Foreign Service at that point.
No, I didn't quite leave the Nigerian Foreign Service. In fact, what happened was that in November 1965, the first Commonwealth Secretary General, Arnold Smith of Canada, visited Nigeria, and in a conversation with the Prime Minister, he said to the Prime Minister that he was keen to build up at the newly established Commonwealth Secretariat a team of Commonwealth diplomats who, here I would like to quote his words, who would help him make nonsense of the myth of racial superiority.
Yes, I read that, actually.
So he said he wanted a Nigerian Foreign Service officer of the middle rank who would help him in that respect. That was how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was asked by the Prime Minister's office to submit 3 names that the Prime Minister would decide. And 3 names were given to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister said, send Anyaoku. And this was how I went to the Commonwealth Secretariat, initially on secondment from the Nigerian Diplomatic Service.
So another stroke of good luck for you. And, you know, again, taking advantage of the fact that the Prime Minister kind of knew who you were. So he was very good and very, I mean, pivotal in your development.
Yes, he was. He was persuaded by the first Commonwealth Secretary General that he needed a Nigerian who would help him establish that peoples of different races were equal. And Prime Minister thought that I would fulfill that, and that was why and how I got seconded to the Commonwealth Secretariat.
And of course, you did the job. I mean, you discharged yourself very equitably there. But I understand that between because by then the Civil War was starting and had in fact started. I understand that between 1968 and 1969, there was a campaign by the military government of General Gowan to recall you from the Commonwealth, saying you were not a suitable Nigerian nominee, because obviously you were technically on the opposite side of, I mean, in terms of your ethnicity, you were from the other side. And in effect, they were anxious about your loyalty to Nigeria, but the Commonwealth ignored that request.
Well, the Commonwealth Secretary General took a principled position that all the Commonwealth staff in the Secretariat owed a collective allegiance to all the Commonwealth countries and not to individual member countries of the Commonwealth. And this was a result of the fact that during the crisis, all Foreign Service officers of Igbo extraction were required to take oath of allegiance to the federal government. And I found it a little difficult to do so because I said that the federal government had not protected the Igbos in northern Nigeria, and the pogrom had taken place, and all that. And so the government in Lagos quite rightly said that if I couldn't take an oath of allegiance to the federal government, they no longer trusted me completely. The Secretary General took what I described as a principled position, and in the end, I was allowed to stay in the Commonwealth Secretariat.
Very interesting. But of course, as I said, Nigeria was in the thick of the Civil War by that time. I mean, how did that war unfold for you? You were living in London.
I was living in London.
But I understand that you were involved in organizing peace talks between Nigerian and Biafran representatives.
That is so, because the interesting thing was that the first attempt, international attempt to broker peace between Nigeria and Biafra was made by the Commonwealth Secretary General, who invited Nigeria and Biafra governments to send delegates to come and discuss the possibility of ceasefire and peace. And at the time, the interesting thing was that the Nigerian delegates and the Biafran delegates would come to my house independently, of course, because my wife is a Yoruba lady, and we had friends across Nigeria and Biafra, and the delegates would independently come to my house, and when the Secretary General put a proposal for ceasefire, and I remember the Biafran delegation was led by late Salu Mbanefo, and he had people like Sisi Mojeku and others with him. I called Sisi Mojeku, who was a very close confidant of Emeka Anyaoku, and said, well, how do you think your boss would react to this? And Sisi Mojeku said to me, there was no way Emeka Anyaoku would agree to those proposals. And I said, well, in which case, Emeka and I are friends. I would like to go and talk to him. He said, well, you probably are the only person who could talk to him about that. So in the middle of the Civil War, I went to Biafra.
Yes, I read that. Fascinating.
I went on the one of the Mercy flights from Amsterdam to Lisbon and Sao Tome to Uli Airport. It was a very hair-raising experience for me.
I can imagine.
Yes, I remember when I told the Secretary General that I would like to go and see Emeka Anyaoku and talk to him about this proposal. Secretary General said to me, that's very dangerous, very dangerous. I mean, I wouldn't send you there. But if you decide to go on your own, that's your own decision. And I said, yes, yes. And so I did go, and I did have a chat with Emeka Anyaoku.
But it was, as you said, a hair-raising experience, because I
hair-raising.
understand you came under attack and stuff.
Of course. When we were coming, the aircraft in which I traveled, when we were coming to land at Uli Airport, the lights were switched off. And suddenly the lights on the ground came on and we could see that. And we landed at midnight, and immediately we landed, the lights went off. So we taxied in total darkness. And when after 3 days I returned to London, it was also equally hair-raising, because I returned by way of Gabon in an aircraft that had no seats, because the aircraft was...
a relief plane, basically.
Yes, yes, yes.
Amazing.
It was, yes.
And I read somewhere that you had to duck under tables or something because you
Yes,
came under fire.
my first morning in Umuahia, I was talking with the Biafran foreign minister then, Matthew Mbu, and his permanent secretary, Godwin Onyebula. Then all of a sudden, the Nigerian Air Force bombers flying overhead, obviously bombing areas in Biafra, and we had to duck under the table.
And that was your first experience of the war, because I mean you'd been abroad all along, so you really had no clue what it was like to be in a war situation.
Yeah, it was both my first and my only experience of the war, because after the 3 days visit to Biafra, I never went back to Biafra until the end of the war.
Please stay with us. This is fascinating talking with you. We'll be back to talk some more. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the respected statesman, former Commonwealth Secretary General and former Nigerian Foreign Minister, Chief Emeka Anyaoku Nigerian. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Anyaoku. Now let's continue our chat with Chief Emeka Anyaoku, former Commonwealth Secretary General, former diplomat at the United Nations and former Nigerian Foreign Minister, an elder statesman who is perhaps one of the world's best known Nigerians. Chief Anyaoku gained international recognition as Africa's first Commonwealth Secretary General and the third overall, rendering enduring service to the Commonwealth of Nations, an association of 56 countries and territories. Thrust into that political spotlight, Chief Anyaoku traveled the world, acting as an intermediary, helping to end apartheid in South Africa, restore democracy in Nigeria, and foster understanding between nations, talking to leaders in dictatorships, one-party states, war zones, disputed territories, and across the deepest divides. But wherever he went, he was venerated as a diplomatic bridge builder. And now, at the age of 92, he's turned his sights on his home country, fully focusing on supporting moves to bequeath a new, more representative constitution to Nigeria. So how much of a dizzying challenge is it for him to be drawn into this toxic political culture? And Chief Emeka Anyaoku is still with me in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us.
Thank you.
And let's just pick it up from where we stopped, because the war ended in 1970, and you remained in the Commonwealth until 1983, when you were appointed Nigeria's foreign minister by the civilian government of Shehu Shagari. But before then, you had encountered General Gowan at the end of that war.
Yes, in April 1972, the Commonwealth Secretary General sent me as his special envoy to heads of state of the Commonwealth in West Africa to persuade them on the issue of recognizing Bangladesh. Bangladesh, which emerged as a country as a result of a war between India and Pakistan. I went first to the Gambia, met the president, went to Sierra Leone, met the president, went to Ghana, met the then head of state, General Acheampong, and then came to Nigeria and met with Gowan, General Gowan. And when I came, Nigeria, the week I arrived, the Daily Times had an editorial that Nigeria must not recognize Bangladesh because Bangladesh had been East Pakistan.
And of course, the Daily Times was the official newspaper, the government
No, it wasn't
newspaper.
Official newspaper as such, but it had tremendous influence on the thinking in the foreign affairs and the Nigerian government. And the Daily Times had taken the position that Bangladesh was a result of secession, and Nigeria had fought a civil war to prevent secession, which was a very valid point of view. So my meeting with General Gowan, I tried to persuade him by telling him that all Commonwealth governments had agreed to recognize Bangladesh, and Commonwealth decisions were taken by consensus, and consensus meant that anybody who disagreed would be prepared to live with the majority position without necessarily supporting the position. And General Gowan eventually said to me, all right, we will, if all the rest of the Commonwealth agreed to recognize Bangladesh, Nigeria would go along, but not to support it, but we will live with it. And that was how. At the end of the meeting, a meeting with General Gowan had the foreign minister, Dr. Koya Rikbo, had the permanent secretary ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Yala, and Gowan's principal secretary, Ambassador Hamzat Ahmadu. At the end of the meeting, General Gowan said, well, he wanted to talk to me alone. So the rest left. And General Gowan said to me, Mr. Anyaoku, during the crisis, you did not support your national government. Why? And I said to him, well, Your Excellency, I thank you for the candor with which you put the question to me, and I owe it to you to answer you equally candidly. I said, I was in London. I was getting reports about the killings and massacres of Igbos in northern Nigeria. I expected that the least the federal government would do was to condemn it and go further by taking steps to prevent it, to stop it. But this did not happen. So I lost faith in my federal government. But at the end of the Civil War, you restored my faith in my country by the unprecedented policy of no victors, no vanquished. That was a very impressive policy, and that completely restored my faith in my country. And Gowan said to me, well, I have heard that you're a very principled man and you've just shown it to me.
Fascinating. And of course, as I mentioned, You remained in the Commonwealth until 1983. Then you were appointed Nigeria's foreign minister by Shehu Shagari. But then later that same year, Shagari was overthrown by the military under Muhammadu Buhari. And you then returned to the Commonwealth.
Yes, I was...
so you were there for 6 months or so?
No, I was foreign minister for 3 months.
Was it 3 months?
Only 3 months as foreign minister, but the period for appointing or electing my successor in the Commonwealth Secretariat as Deputy Commonwealth Secretary General, the notice for calling for nominations was to end on February 16, 1984. And the coup, we were displaced and literally 1st of January, it was midnight of eve of the new year. And I must say that I was the first minister allowed by the government of Buhari and Idiagbo to leave the country, because General Buhari and Idiagbo, I saw them, they said to me, Mr. Anyaoku, we know you've had nothing to do with corruption, and we can...
And therefore you're free to go.
I said, we cannot have you as a foreign minister. And I said to them, well, thank you very much for recognizing that I had nothing to do with corruption. And I would, of course, advise you, even if you were so minded, not to have me as foreign minister, because as your foreign minister, I would need to go and spend a lot of time explaining how I changed from serving a civilian government to a military government.
Yeah.
And the process for electing a Deputy Commonwealth Secretary General involved the head of state of your country nominating you for the position. And General Buhari and Idiagbo, when I told them that was the process, that since they said I had nothing to do with corruption, that my new head of state would need to write a letter to the Commonwealth Secretary General nominating me for re-election to the job. And Buhari said to me, yes, we will do so, I will do so.
Amazing.
And he not only wrote the letter, but he sent the secretary to the government, Lehman Chiroma, to carry the letter to London.
Wow.
And this was how
you returned to the Commonwealth.
I returned to the Commonwealth, because by then 3 other Commonwealth governments had nominated candidates, but when my name appeared, they withdrew, and I was unanimously re-elected.
Amazing.
Yes.
You are a lucky man, I have to say. The fate has been on your side, but of course you've had the capacity, as I say, to impress people. And 6 years later, in 1989, you were elected Commonwealth Secretary General and re-elected again for a second 5-year term in 1995. That crowned your success in the world of diplomacy. But you also faced huge challenges, didn't you? Not least apartheid in South Africa, the continued incarceration of Nelson Mandela, and later, of course, the dictatorship of General Abacha in your own country, Nigeria, which led to the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa and the rest of the Ogoni Nine. How much of a challenge was all that for you?
Well, when I became Secretary General, I was aware of the fact that the strongest criticism against the Commonwealth was that the Commonwealth was had among its membership countries that were not democratic. And so I regarded it as my primary mission to make the Commonwealth a potent force for promoting democracy and human rights. And so I was very keen. I got involved. First, I looked at the Commonwealth countries that were under one-party state. That's clearly not democratic. And I went to talk with their heads. I had long conversations with President Arap Moi of Kenya and persuaded him to change from one-party state to multi-party. I had long conversations with President Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia and persuaded him. I also had long conversations with President of Malawi, Kamuzu Banda, and also the President of the Republic of Seychelles, Albert Rone. And fortunately, I was able to persuade them to conduct elections that brought in multi-party governments in their respective countries. And then, of course, in South Africa, the apartheid, the Commonwealth had for long been opposing apartheid. That was why the South African government left the Commonwealth in 1961. And the Commonwealth championed international sanctions against apartheid in South Africa. My immediate predecessor in office, Sasone Ramphal, was a very, very strong advocate of Commonwealth sanctions against South Africa. And then when I became Secretary General in 1990, fortunately, President F.W. de Klerk released Nelson Mandela from 27 years imprisonment. And I, therefore, had the task of going to South Africa to have a conversation with President F.W. de Klerk to see how the Commonwealth could help him change South Africa from apartheid to democracy. And I was involved in the discussions with him. I was involved in sending Commonwealth statesmen to go to the conference that F.W. de Klerk had convened with the leaders of the opposition parties. And when that conference was threatened to break down following the massacre of ANC stalwarts in a place called Boipatong by the apartheid police, I had to fly to South Africa. I had to do a memorandum that was signed by F.W. de Klerk, the president, by Nelson Mandela, by Clarence Mankwetu of PAC, by Gacha Buthelezi of IFP, and by General Constant Viljoen, the leader of the Afrikaner Party. And that memorandum restored the talks, because I sent Commonwealth policemen to go and help train the South African police that had been used to the philosophy of just dealing with protesters against apartheid, to teach them philosophy of community policing, and also helped South Africa with its elections. I sent experts, that elections that produced Nelson Mandela as the first democratically elected president of South Africa. So that was my role in terms of promoting democracy in the Commonwealth. And then in Nigeria...
Yeah, I was going to say you succeeded with all those countries, but you didn't quite succeed with convincing General Abacha to sort of return to democracy.
No, I did not, but I did try. In 1994, 3 weeks after MKO Abiola was detained, I visited here. And in my meeting with General Abacha, I said I wanted to see Abiola in detention. And his first reaction was, no, you can't. I mean, the chap has been charged with treason against his country and blah, blah. And I said to him, Excellency, you must be aware that the media has been reporting that Abiola is being tortured and is not well. And when I leave you, the media is bound to ask me about Abiola. And I will feel obliged to tell them that I asked you to let me see Abiola and you refused. And that will confirm all the... He paused for a while and said, okay, you'll see him. So I did see Abiola in prison, in detention. I was the only person who saw him in detention, and I had a long conversation with him. At that time, I had a proposal for resolving the crisis in Nigeria. I got him to agree to my proposal. Then I went to Abacha, but Abacha didn't agree. Abacha didn't agree to the proposal, so that didn't fly. And of course, my last conversation with Abacha was the day he detained General Obasanjo. I called him and said that that was very unwise and that it wouldn't serve our country image, that Obasanjo was well respected internationally as a democrat, the first military ruler who handed over government to civilians voluntarily. And General Abacha said to me, well, Excellency, you know, I love this country, I love our country, I'm prepared to die for it. And I said to him, well, Excellency, I'm older than you, I have loved the country longer than you have.
I like that.
And he said, well, if I can convince you, there's no point in continuing this conversation. Because I had said to him that if the evidence against Obasanjo was that strong, he should put him under house detention, surround his house with security people, and rather than take him to prison. And,
amazing, really, just listening to you talk about these things. And of course, just very briefly, he then subsequently, prior to that, executed Ken Saro-Wiwa, which occasioned the Commonwealth suspending Nigeria.
yes, yes. When reports got to me that Ken Saro-Wiwa and his 9 colleagues had been sentenced to death, I personally called General Abacha and appealed to him not to execute them. And I got Nelson Mandela to also call him and appeal to him. But on the eve of our meeting, Commonwealth heads of government meeting in New Zealand, in Auckland, Ken Saro-Wiwa and his colleagues were executed. And the Commonwealth heads of government, pressed by Nelson Mandela, had no option but to suspend Nigeria.
Yeah. I remember that period very well. Anyway, we've literally got, it's amazing how fascinating this conversation has been. We've got about 4 minutes or so left. You retired as Commonwealth Secretary General in 2000. You were knighted by Queen Elizabeth, decorated with CFR, GCON in Nigeria, given the highest civilian honors by Cameroon, Lesotho, Madagascar, Namibia, Trinidad and Tobago. You also hold 33 honorary doctorate degrees from top universities in Britain, Canada, Ireland, Switzerland, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa and Zimbabwe. And of course, you also hold the traditional chieftaincy title of Ichie Adazie of Obosi. That's your hometown in Anambra State. What a life. And in terms of what you're doing at the national level at the moment, you're leading the eminent group known as the Patriots, and your focus is on giving this country a more representative constitution that will better represent the many ethnicities in this country and restructure Nigeria in a more equitable and inclusive manner. Tell us about that briefly.
Well, I'm concerned that Nigeria is a pluralistic country. As a country, the component parts of which belong to different cultural, religious groups. And the experience the world over of pluralistic countries those that have survived as individual political entities are those that have truly federal constitutions. But those that did not have truly federal constitutions ended up disintegrating, like Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Sudan, and so on. And so I am very concerned and anxious that Nigeria, a pluralistic country, should have a truly federal constitution. The constitution we have now is not a truly federal constitution. We began independence with truly federal constitution, and that was why Nigeria made greater progress in the early years of independence. So the patriots are committed to Nigeria's unity and Nigeria's governance structure being truly federal. That's why we organized a summit meeting that attracted representatives from all over the country. And before the summit meeting, we had zonal consultations at which views were expressed. And all the views we gathered are in support of a new constitution for the country. That's what I'm very, very keen on.
I was going to ask you, because we've got about 30 seconds or so, what is left for you to do that you haven't done? What would you wish for next in your journey through life?
I would wish for my country to have a constitution that enables it to develop in peace, that enables it to tackle the current serious challenges of insecurity, massive poverty, and dwindling sense of national unity. I believe that a constitution that enables it to reverse the trends that exist currently, that's my wish, and if I can contribute to achieving that, that will be my last contribution to my country.
Chief Emeka Anyaoku, I want to thank you exceedingly. We're very honored to have had you here. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you very much for having me.
So this is Chief Emeka Anyaoku in this interview. What are your thoughts concerning what he says about the Nigerian Civil War, about the military regime, about his role he played in bringing South Africa from apartheid to democracy, what he says concerning Nigeria in general and what will make Nigeria to be a better place, his role during the Civil War and other things he did through the influence of him as Commonwealth Secretary General to bring peace and sanity into Nigerian politics. Please drop your comment at the comment section, and please like this video, share it, subscribe for us, follow us for more as we go deep into Nigerian politics as Nigeria prepared for the 2027 election. Can we get a man just like Chief Emeka Anyaoku who will peddle the affairs of Nigeria and bring Nigeria where it belongs? Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you in my next video. God bless you.